So let's have a conversation about South Sudan. There is a lot of concern on the ground, especially in the last couple of days. Let's bring in John Gashie. He's joining us from our City Center studio. He's very well versed with the events and happenings in South Sudan, and not just South Sudan, but the entire region as well. John, good to speak to you. Good afternoon. Let's begin from the point where South African President Jacob Zuma is asking Riek Machar to go back to South Sudan to participate in the transitional government. How do you think that is going to be taken in South Sudan?
Thank you, Linda. That, to me, will be a very, very important development. When you look at it in the light that if Dr. Riek Machar was to go back, then there would have to be some trade-off in relation to the position of the first vice president, and whether then Riek Machar will be assuming his position that he supposedly lost when there was this fighting in Juba in July. Now that would have the effect of perhaps having the principles back. Now, whether that is tenable right now or whether that will pan out is another matter, because as perhaps you're aware, there are indications that Dr. Riek Machar is on his way to South Africa to seek medical treatment or medical services. I don't know whether that really is something that is in the works. But again, it's a nice, positive development if it will be effected.
Yeah, and then putting in mind that this is the first time that Riek Machar is actually being seen giving a presser. Tell me, Gashie, because you have ears on the ground in South Sudan, what are you hearing about the stability of that country as we speak?
Linda, let's put it this way. South Sudan is slowly and progressively perhaps losing traction. Now, the center seems not to be holding, and there are so many contending and conflicting reports about what is actually happening on the ground. And it's more so unfortunate that it's a leadership crisis in which the elite in South Sudan have sacrificed the well-being of the people of South Sudan at the altar of their political egos. Now, perhaps the other tragedy is that the international community has, in my view, dragged its feet. And I say this in relation to the on and off ongoing call for an international protection force that has yet to be agreed upon.
Gashie, it's interesting that you mentioned the international community, because before you look at the international community, one would have expected that the African Union would be the first to speak about this, would be the first to try and put things in place, and putting in mind the fact that you say the center seems not to be holding.
Thank you, Linda. When I'm talking about the international community, for me, the biggest tragedy is that the international community, and I say the regional countries, Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia, and Sudan, that are the front line, seem to be sending some very conflicting messages to the elite in South Sudan, in that they seem to get very, what I would call, very soft slaps on the wrists. And in the meantime, the international community doesn't seem to be able to be getting a consensus as how best to deal with this. Now, for Kenya, we have been used by both of these groups as a ground in which they come in after carrying out all sorts of crimes against humanity. And you see all these senior people out here in Nairobi, in the streets of Nairobi, and without really much ado. And you get the feeling that possibly Kenya has not been using its diplomatic leverage, and perhaps, in my view, Linda, this might turn out to be another Somalia. Remember,
Yeah.
Kenya took a long time to have a coherent policy on Somalia, and it blew in our faces. The same is likely to happen in South Sudan.
You know,
And
Gashie, that would be quite unfortunate, but then today we saw members of parliament, Kenyan members of parliament, talk about sanctions on South Sudan leaders here in the country. Do you think that is going to have any effect? Is this the right direction finally from Kenyan leaders and indeed the Kenyan government?
my God, I wish this was done earlier, and I'm hoping that really that there is commitment, because Kenya has had a fairly interesting position vis-a-vis the developments in South Sudan. We have a lot of leverage, political, financial, and other diplomatic means to have called the elite in South Sudan to order. But in the past, we've been waffling about, and I think, as somebody, senior South Sudanese official said one time, that should Kenya put its foot down, then they would speak Kiswahili. They would ask, mnataka tufanye nini? In the interim, Kenya has really perhaps not used its diplomatic leverage, the financial. A lot of the leaders in South Sudan have their immediate families here. It's, in my view, tragic that they fight in South Sudan, and when they meet out here, they are well fated. They meet with our senior policy makers, politicians, and I call them, in my view, the undertakers of South Sudan, because Kenya, indeed, as if what you're saying is true, it's about time that Kenya held the leadership in South Sudan accountable by not allowing them to abuse our hospitality and come here and kind of play into our faces that they can get away with almost what I would call certain murder, crimes against humanity. And then they come here and they dangle the money, they dangle economic interest. And in the meantime, it's the Kenyan people who, if South Sudan collapses, will carry the blame, will carry the burden.
Yeah, the camps are going to start filling up again if this is not resolved. Allow me to bring to your attention some international development with respect to South Sudan as well. Russia has disclosed that they will veto any plans by UN Security Council to impose arms embargo on South Sudan. Good, bad, helping, not helping?
Very, very tragic and very bad for the people of South Sudan, because Russia is playing on a different level to attack the international community vis-a-vis its position in Syria. And I think that is perhaps the situation in which the elite in South Sudan have learned to play different factions to their advantage. Indeed, the elite in South Sudan have played on these geopolitical divisions and interests to carry out what I would call callous attacks against their people. And perhaps if IGAD, where Kenya is leading, Ethiopia, South Sudan, and Uganda, were to effect and use their leverage, perhaps the situation in South Sudan wouldn't be as dire as it is at the moment.
Gashie, KTN News is a channel that is watched in the entire region, so I'm hoping that in assuming that someone from South Sudan is listening, some of the leaders, and one would pose the question, then how do we get South Sudan out of where it is? As we speak, there's a lot of tension. As we speak, Riek Machar is heading to South Africa for medical attention. But then on the ground, like you say, the center seems not to be holding. Way out, Gashie.
Linda, way out, at least from my view, is both a combination of internal and external pressure, and perhaps a new leadership structure, and possibly a more effective and concerted effort by the region to hold the leadership in South Sudan to account. We have accepted them into the East African community. Are they really worth being part of us? If, as it is now, the country has been in a situation of dire humanitarian, security, and economic collapse because the elite, both in the opposition and in government, cannot seem to agree on the way forward, and then they get out in Kenya and they kind of go about as though nothing has happened. Well, their immediate family members are having a good time. And if it blows into our faces, as it almost certainly will, unless something happens, we will be hosting a lot of South Sudanese again. And we've been down that road again.
Yeah. It's a road that we all do not want to go through. Gashie, let me bring to your attention again some breaking news that you're just getting, and pick your mind because you're a regional reporter, you're a regional analyst. You don't just focus on South Sudan, you focus on the entire region as well. And it's interesting that you say that probably we have leaders who think they can get away with anything and everything, and this brings Burundi into perspective. So as we speak right now, Gashie, Burundi's lower house of parliament has voted to withdraw from the International Criminal Court. What are your thoughts?
It's impunity going wild. It's an indication that what I would call dictatorial leadership is taking place in Africa. And then the East African community again needs to be able to make it painful. The African Union, they need to make sure that the issues of violence, impunity, crimes against humanity, and your own people, you cannot be allowed to get away with it. Now, for Burundi to pull out of the ICC, it's possibly an indication that they feel that they will be held to account.
That is probably that is an argument that a lot of people would have, and putting in mind that South Sudanese, actually Sudan's president Bashir is also wanted by the ICC, and Burundi's president is alleged to have committed some serious crimes, especially in his bid to seek re-election. But then, Gashie, there's the argument that Africa needs African solutions, so probably we need to pull out of the ICC and then seek African solutions when it comes to issues touching on Africa. What are your thoughts?
That's a dangerous road.
Why?
That the ICC, perhaps its performance hasn't been that exemplary. For the Africans to say that they would like to have their own version of justice, you are opening the way for what I would call crimes against humanity, culture of impunity, and dictatorship to take place. Now, has the ICC been responsive to the African issues? Yes. Has it rubbed the African leadership in the wrong way? Yes. Have they perhaps felt a little uneasy? Yes. Do we need the ICC? Yes, we do.
Really? Because there's the argument that probably we need an African court, Gashie.
The African court, if you're talking about the court that is supposedly going to be in Gambia,
yeah,
or the court that is supposedly going to be, deciding on the fate of, Bashir, or possibly the Ethiopian leadership, as it were, and possibly elsewhere in Burundi, I am not so sure that's really where we want to go. That the ICC has not perhaps sufficiently addressed the issues does not in any way mean that Africa has the capacity to do it. Now, look at Chad. Look at Central African Republic. Look at Guinea-Bissau. Look at Mozambique. Look at the case of Burundi, and even Kenya, Somalia. And Eritrea, for that matter, we needed to have an institution that can protect the human rights of the African people. And human rights are not on the basis of a continent or race or color. It's on the basis of human rights and dignity and the right.
Okay. Gashie, now that Burundi is pulling out of the ICC with respect to ESC, is that probably a pointer to the direction ESC is going to take, do you think?
I pray not, but the indications possibly that this might be an indication that certain political leadership within the region would want to seek and engage in acts of impunity. It's a dangerous trend, and I think it's something that Africa and the people in Africa ought to oppose. Indeed, the media, the civil society, the faith and other religious organizations, they need to oppose those moves that would allow African leadership, like is happening in Eritrea, South Sudan, Burundi, and God who knows where else, to engage in crimes against humanity.
Okay.